Thank you to all of those who are in attendance as we speak. My name's Jeff. I'm the sales manager with HME Home Health, and super excited today to introduce Kathy Fisher, who is one of our clinical educators here at HME. And this will be one of the first of a series of webinars we'll be hosting in our fiscal year 2023. So for today on, Kathy's going to be presenting on making public spaces accessible. And today's going to be focused mainly on schools and buildings, but it's going to be, for group homes and long-term care as well. You can apply a lot of the things for the same settings. So Kathy Fisher has recently just joined us as a clinical educator for us, and she has a background in occupational therapy. She worked as an assistive technology provider and a clinical educator for the last 33 years-ish, Kathy. So she's also been involved in the provision of high technology rehab equipment with clients with a variety of diagnostic categories, including pediatrics and bariatrics. But her main area of interest and expertise is focused on the complex rehab side of things, as well as high technology powered mobility and complex seating. And I believe most recently, Kathy has joined the NARTS supplier, which is the National Registry of Rehab Technology Suppliers, as an education manager. She's going to be promoting education and responsibility among equipment providers, which will help ensure the excellence in the service and delivery of complex rehab technology equipment. So Kathy's got a wealth of experience and is very much qualified in terms of this industry. And this presentation is going to run approximately 2 hours long. So we will have probably a few opportunities along the way to ask questions, but if we can hold the questions until the end, and then we can have a Q&A session towards the very end of the presentation.
All right. Well, thanks, Jeff. I'm really excited to be with you guys today. Accessibility is something that's really, really important. It's something that's gaining awareness slowly but surely. BC seems to be leading the charge in Canada, which is great to see. I really wanted to sort of focus today, not just on public spaces. Originally, when we put this presentation together, we were focusing kind of on schools, but it applies to, like Jeff said, a lot of different settings, group homes, attractions, buildings. And as we move out of the COVID world and are trying to get our clients back into the real world again. I know some of them are hesitant, but slowly we're starting to return to something a little bit more normal and trying to encourage our clients to get back out. So what does it mean to be accessible? Again, when we think of accessibility, we generally tend to think of public buildings being accessible, entrances, doorway openings, and not just the outer door, but think about apartment buildings and the inner locked door, that provides security for the building. Sometimes that door isn't as wide as the outer door, and that presents an issue for people living or visiting a building. Door openers. Again, door openers are something that have become kind of mainstream and an expectation. And sometimes that's a challenge, again, when you have security concerns in schools, in public, in apartment buildings, in group homes and things like that. So I think it's really important to think about, how does the door open? Where is the door opener button? And we laughed just recently. I was with a client and we were trying to get into a building, and of course the door opener was behind the door. So he had to push the button, drive back, allow the door to open, get himself in position and drive through, which doesn't sound that challenging until you realize that he was driving with a mini joystick with, very little control and movement in his finger. So it presents, some real challenges. So just to say something is accessible doesn't mean that it's necessarily functional. And I think that's where you guys come in. And my goal today is to really talk about what's your role, what is it, what do we need to consider when we're talking about accessibility, and then who do you rely on? Because we can't all know everything, but what we want is for you to have an opportunity to have a team behind you that can help you in making recommendations and trying to get the world more accessible. So we're going to talk about some of these products and considerations around these products, but I just wanted to highlight, and the picture there is from a company called Access Now, which is a website that was developed actually by a friend and a client of mine. Her name is Mayan Ziv. Michelle Harvey knows her well. HME has provided some equipment for her to borrow. You may have seen her all over social media recently because she had a disaster with Air Canada where her chair was completely destroyed and she arrived in Israel with no chair to use, coincidentally speaking to at an accessibility conference, and they destroyed her wheels. So she's been very upfront and out there trying to implement change, not just in the world of accessibility, but also in the world of public transportation. And she does have some government support. But if you're not familiar with this app, it's a really cool app. You can just go on the App Store, whatever device you use, and you can rate a space. So whether you're going into a restaurant or a facility, and really this came out of her own experience going to university in downtown Toronto. She wanted to be able to go out with friends, and there was no way to know before she got somewhere whether she could access the bathroom, access the front door. And so this app is now worldwide. You can go on and register and then go in and say, hey, I was at Cafe Vancouver today, and the front door is accessible, but the bathroom isn't. And there are different levels, and you see these different colors on the app. So it's been really handy from a personal point of view. If you're out with somebody or you have friends whose parents may be using some type of mobility device. So it's really, trying to bring accessibility into the mainstream. And I think that's really important. And from there, I was starting to put this presentation together, and I found a really interesting clip. I was watching the news one day, and Shirley's going to play this video for you. It's a clip from the news a couple of weeks ago, and it is an old client of mine. She has, I was with her as she transitioned into primary school. She is now transitioning to high school, and this was the experience. So I'm going to let Shirley run the clip, and then we can talk a little bit about it, and it kind of flows us into the presentation.
A Toronto woman says she camps outside her daughter's school each day, all day, in case her child needs help.
The teen lives with a condition that affects her mobility, and her school struggles with accommodation. CTV's Andrew Brennan reports on their story and what they hope can be done.
Honey, do you need me right now?
You can find Michelle Cousins here every school day, in her van down the street from her daughter's school. Colette is 14 years old in grade 9. She has arthrogryposis, which affects her mobility.
I'm the one who greets her when she gets off the bus. I help her get into the school. I help her take her coat off. I give her a kiss and she goes in. And then I hop back in my van and I find a parking spot.
She waits for her daughter to call to use the bathroom. Normally, it would be a task for educational assistants, but this, Cousin says, is the best way to ensure her daughter's dignity until the board finds a workaround. She says she tried to flag issues last October before Colette was accepted to Marshall McLuhan in May. Cousin says she was told in June everything would be ready for Colette in the fall, but found out otherwise the day before school started.
Grab bars weren't installed. The elevator company didn't come in and inspect the elevator to modify it.
And of 9 educational assistants at the school, only 2, she says, are able to lift her daughter. If there is a fire drill, she says the plan she had to sign off on was leaving Colette in a stairwell.
Students with disabilities are treated like an afterthought.
An advocate who was on a committee to address accessibility barriers in education says the Ministry of Education has been sitting on recommendations for months.
And individual parents from one end of this province to another have to keep fighting those barriers one at a time.
Education Minister Stephen Lecce's office says it's consulting currently with the Ministry of Seniors and Accessibility. The Toronto Catholic District School Board says it wouldn't comment on this specific case, but did say the school has an elevator, accessible washroom, and an operable Hoyer lift. Support staff are also available and assigned as needed to assist any student that may require accommodations. Cousins says she disagrees with much of that. Right now, she is searching for a supplier, waiting for new equipment to come, then tested, and then for staff to be trained.
We're playing catch up. Now they're working tirelessly, and I do believe individually they do care, but I just sit there and it's just a mess.
Cousins says she and Colette picked the school in part because of the environment, the programming, as well as the administration and staff. But she says that she expects to be waiting outside of the school in her van just in case her daughter needs her, at least until Christmas, for the resources that she says are needed for her daughter to attend school independently. Andrew Brennan, CTV News.
So the reason that I wanted to play that clip for you is because I think it just highlights the importance of, planning, you as therapists, your recommendations, and how to ensure that, this particular situation, and yes, it's in Toronto, it could be anywhere. The reality of it is, if they started working last October and here we are into November of the following year and it's still not suitable, it's really, something is wrong with the system. It's not that easy to change, but I think it highlights your responsibility and your recommendations to be able to say, this is really important for these kids to be able to function not only with dignity, but with safety in their schools. So it kind of led me to say, what do you need to do? What can we do? What do you need to present in terms of looking at funding options for these challenges, making schools ready, and can we develop a plan so that the environment is flexible enough that clients can then get into the school, be safe when they're there, expect help and care while they're there. And, there's a backup plan when things go sideways. So let's step back a little bit and talk about why should we consider accessibility products? Where are your clients going? Like I said, clients are going to school now. They're back in schools, thankfully. Clients are starting to go back into libraries and sports facilities, work environments. So again, we need to think about how are they going to get in? And then I'm going to talk in a minute about evacuation. How are they going to get out in instances where there's a problem? Creating accessibility awareness. There's lots going on, like I said, with Mayan developing Access Now and things like that. I think we need, as therapists and as equipment providers, to think about, more than just a client using a wheelchair in their home, but think about, where they're going. Are those environments accessible and appropriate? Is parking appropriate? All of those kinds of things, and look beyond just the day-to-day lives, but enhancing our clients' lives. And then looking at early planning, looking at some of the buildings that exist out there and can they be made accessible? Is it realistic to think that they can be made accessible? And then look at funding opportunities. Again, BC is leading the charge with, the goal for, greater accessibility and making public spaces accessible by 2024. Looking at the Rick Hansen Foundation and the grants that they're providing, many of which have been in the BC regions, and making those spaces accessible. So there are places that you can go to try and look at funding opportunities, again, to make our clients' lives better and more fulfilled, and get our clients out there. So when we're starting to think about public and private accessibility, we need to think about who is the person that needs that access. Is it a client who's independent and fully functional? Is it a client that travels with a caregiver? Is it a client with a mobility device? Or is it a client with mobility challenges, maybe relating to behavioral issues? They may be walking, but they're not consistent walkers. They may be at fall risk, those kinds of things. So we need to think about, especially shared spaces, so bathrooms and things like that. What are the functional abilities and what can we provide and have ready for the clients who are using those spaces? We need to think of safety, not just for the client, but whoever comes with them, whether it's a parent, a caregiver, an educational assistant, that sort of thing. And then thinking that all of our clients are not created equal. So, they change. There are different sizes of people. It's all well and good to say a bathroom is accessible, but if you can't get into the door or into the stall, then that's really not useful. Or if the client can get themselves in the chair into a stall, but the caregiver doesn't fit, what do you do? We need to think about those specific environments. Are they public or private? Or do they sort of cross over? A group home being kind of one of those sort of crossover environments, even though it's private because the clients live there, is it considered a public space because there are multiple clients living there? And do we need to be aware of that when we're recommending lifts and things like that? Okay. Is the access adaptable for changing users? So schools really jump to mind here. So we set a bathroom up for a client, maybe like Colette that was in the news clip there. She has a specific set of needs, but is she sharing that bathroom with another child in a wheelchair? And is that child's level of functional ability the same or different? So how do we make it as flexible as possible? And maybe then we have the clients with behavioral challenges, and having all the equipment in the room is actually a problem. So do we need to look at maybe shared spaces, but they're not for everybody? The kids with behavioral challenges use one bathroom, and the kids with physical challenges and mobility devices use a different bathroom. So again, trying to think about that. And what is the purpose of the structure and that space? And then are there design building limitations? Okay. Is it an old building and there isn't space to put a ramp out front? Is it an old building and it's not reasonable to think you can put an elevator in the space? Is it a newer building and this should have been thought about when it was designed? And who's making those decisions? Is it an architect making those decisions, or is it you as a therapist helping and consulting with the building companies to try and get a design that makes sense? Okay. And then what's the specific space? What's the goal of that space? What's the size and the actual functional space within that? Thinking about a client and a caregiver and a lift, what has to exist in that space? And then, considerations, like I said, for shared spaces, and speaking about dignity, maintaining privacy. So issues around who's in the space with the clients. We've all walked into those bathrooms that have accessible delayed doors, and you stand there for a minute out with a lineup outside the bathroom waiting for that door to close and lock, making sure that the clients are aware of that and the caregiver just doesn't, start to whip the client's clothes off and change them while the door is still open and people can see them. So making those spaces safe and with dignity. So what do you need to think before you start even thinking about the products themselves? Okay, so early planning. Is the space appropriate to be modified? Okay, are there limitations? Are there building limitations? Are there things in the ceiling that may limit you from being able to put a ceiling lift in, for example? Is it an old building? Is there asbestos in the building? Some of those challenges, you want to start to ask those questions before you're even looking for funding and a specific product. You're making sure that it's actually realistic to think that we can work with that building. Again, like I said, flexibility. Who's using that space and what's that space being used for? And can that be changed? So in the case of a school, you've got a set of students this year, but maybe after Christmas, somebody new comes in, or who's going to be in that space next year. We don't know what's coming. So trying to make that space as flexible as possible. When I talked about, are the modification costs realistic? Are you spending good money to still have limitations? And maybe there's a different situation. And maybe the reality is a school might not be appropriate for the specific needs of a client, and may not be ready. So those are some questions to ask. We've talked about privacy and dignity of users. We've talked a little bit about what are the caregiving requirements and where are the spaces for those caregivers to work, and are they appropriate? And then also safety and preparedness. So again, like I go back to that story, they started planning for that a year ago, and the school still wasn't ready. So how do you avoid that from happening, and having a family, really distraught because, she was concerned about her daughter being in a situation that, was unsafe. So again, when you start to look at those spaces, using some of these floor plans, and they're available online, you can see them online, but it helps to create education. You can use the drawing from a school, for example, to make notes showing specific product placement. I can draw on there where I want a ceiling lift to be. I mean, this is obviously a home situation in an apartment, but you might be looking at, a school situation. I might want to draw on there exactly where I want that lift to be so that whoever's setting it up knows to do that. Okay. And put your clinical justification right on there. Again, it highlights, we know a picture is worth 1,000 words. It highlights the need for this space to be appropriate. So quickly, let's talk about getting in and out of buildings, and then we'll talk about what's in the building. So we all know that accessibility, kind of our first thing that comes to mind is, do we use a ramp or do we use some sort of vertical platform lift to get somebody into a space? Okay. And there are pros and cons to both. If we're thinking of a home, maybe a ramp is quick, it's simple, it's easy to construct, but think about the cost of wood. Jeff and I were talking about supply chain issues. Again, the cost of wood has gone up probably 3 times in the last couple of years. So is it easy to construct, and is there space appropriate? Because if you look at the building code, for every inch you go up, you go out a foot. So again, that can really take up a lot of space. In a public building situation, you may not have that luxury. Okay. Is it removable for somebody who lives in a rental situation or a group home situation that building may not always be used for that specific purpose? We've seen, beautiful landscaping if somebody wants to spend the money. It can be beautiful. You can sort of hide the ramp. And I've always said, does the ramp draw attention when you're in a home situation that somebody with a disability lives there, and maybe it's a target for somebody breaking in? So maybe we want to kind of hide that a little bit and make it not so obvious, and also make it look nice. We want buildings to look nice. We want homes to have curb appeal. But again, we need to think about, is it appropriate? What are the weather conditions? It gets very slippery when it rains a lot. Okay. And does that affect somebody's stability? I did have a situation years ago where, they built a ramp for a gentleman to go home who had had a stroke. His wife also had some mobility challenges. They went home. The ramp was very slippery. She was trying to control him going down the ramp. She slipped and fell. He rolled, the wheelchair rolled into her. The client fell out, and both of them were injured. So again, maybe it's not always the safest situation, but these are things to think about. Again, is it a temporary situation? Is it a situation where someone needs to come home from the hospital? And as we know, hospital stays keep getting shorter and shorter. We don't have time to get things ready. So is a temporary ramp something that's appropriate? And if we're looking at a temporary ramp, portable ramp such as this, is it realistic to think that you can go up more than 3 steps? Look at the rise. And again, if it's a power chair, that's one thing, but if it's a manual chair, what is the implication for somebody pushing that client up, not only up, but down that ramp? If it's a rental situation, a modular ramp might be a good option because it can come out. Or are we looking at a permanent ramp, and where are we placing that ramp with relation to the house? Is it going up along the side and in the back? Is it going in the front door? Again, what are the spaces that you're working with? And then I threw this little video in for you to just show you, again, think about negotiating that ramp. This is my friend Nicholas. Nicholas uses a head array to drive his power chair. It's a lot of work to drive with a head array. And where they were able to build the ramp, you see he has to come up, he has to make a 90-degree turn, and then another 90-degree turn to get into the house. Now, his mom is there most days when he gets off the bus after school, but what if she wasn't there? What if something happened? What if she got delayed? Could he get in the house by himself? So these are things to think about. Accessibility doesn't mean the same thing for every one of our clients. And as we're talking about ramps, I just threw in a picture of threshold ramps because they come in very handy, not only in houses, but apartments, sometimes even in schools or group homes where you have transition between floors, where you have sliding patio doors. But again, remember the limitations. They're really designed to only go over 1 to 2 inch lifts. Some of the sliding doors to get out onto balconies in apartments and things like that can be as much as 4 inches. And a threshold ramp really isn't going to cut it. It's really not safe. The other thing is, think about where you're placing that threshold ramp to make sure it's not a tripping hazard for other people that are using that space, that it's visible, that it's obvious, and that people are aware of it. So we don't have caregivers or people that maybe aren't familiar with the space, tripping and falling because they've stepped on it by mistake. Then we look to the platform lifts, okay? We call them sometimes porch lifts. In a commercial setting, we call them platform lifts. And again, there are different sizes, there are different components to these lifts, but the idea is that you can go up a greater rise, okay? And access a house maybe from the outside, maybe through a garage. Again, often you'll see these even in public spaces where there isn't room for a full-blown elevator. We were just at a trade show in a hotel and they didn't really have, they really don't have a great elevator system for the trade show area. And they really have, they didn't put a full-blown elevator in. They put, a glorified high-tech platform lift in, but that limits how many people can be in the elevator at once. It restricts the weight and that sort of thing. So was it a great option for a public space? It's right on the edge. So what are some of the benefits to the platform lifts? Obviously, it's easy access. There's not a lot of effort in terms of pushing up the ramp and dealing with an incline. There's reduced stress not only on the client, but on the caregiver. It makes for an opportunity of greater safety and independence for that client who has access to be able to operate that themselves, okay? The other thing is we don't know what the path the journey that our clients are going to be on and what type of equipment they're going to use. And that equipment may change over time. So we also need to be aware of what are the weight capacities and the sizes of those decks, because over time that may change and the need may change. So always err on the side of a greater weight capacity is the better choice as long as you have the funding for it. Again, we need to think about where is it going to be placed and what sort of construction has to happen. Of course, we need to make sure that there is access. If the lift wasn't used, it wasn't working, you do have to have fire access for other people living in the home. We need to think about what power source. Is it a battery operated system or is it directly wired into a power source so it's all power is always available, but do you have a battery backup in case of a power failure? Okay, so again, what's the maintenance required, and are the people aware of what that maintenance is? Because we see a lot of times, a lift goes in and nobody's done anything to it, and 3 years from now there's a problem with it and it hasn't been maintained. It's been sitting out in a wet and cold environment. So again, we need to prepare our clients for that. This is an example of, again, making sure that the porch lift is appropriate. So this client, this is my friend Severio. He was lucky in a sense. So he has osteogenesis imperfecta. You can see weight is a challenge for him and size is a challenge. He lived at home with his parents and his brother and his grandparents. His grandfather had been in an industrial accident, and workers' comp had provided a lift for him years ago. He has since passed away, and the lift, as Severio got bigger and his chair got bigger and the porch lift got older and older, became a real challenge. So he did get funding for a new one, but our challenge was the space. This is a semi-detached house. So we had, the stairs and the porch lift, and that's it. That's the porch. So you can see the challenge that he has coming off that porch lift. The door is to the right in the picture. So he had to come off the porch lift, make a 90-degree turn. He had to actually go past the door so that the door could be opened, because there's a screen door on there. And then he has to turn and get through the door. And all of this sitting in a 23-inch wide power chair. Okay. So again, we needed to be aware of how could he maneuver it. He's had lots of experience. He's a great driver. But it's still, when we have a wet, miserable day, and yes, the porch area is covered, but the lift isn't covered. So again, we had weight capacity to deal with, we had space issues, and we needed to make sure that it was going to be functional for him. Again, he was coming and going on his own when not necessarily someone would be home. And we need to think about what are the options for safety. And again, manufacturers will tell you that you don't necessarily have to purchase every option, but safety is paramount. And I know in talking with people at HME, we always recommend a gate on the porch lift because what happens, in an emergency situation. We don't want someone, this is a picture of the top landing platform gate. You can also have one at the bottom. Again, just making sure that nobody falls in by accident when the lift is down. If there are other kids in the home, if there are multiple caregivers going in, again, trying to make sure that, we know what the safety options are, and we want to make sure that our clients, we're not setting them up for a potentially unsafe situation. Again, how are the clients, if they're operating the system on their own, how do they, if an unusual caregiver was there and left the porch lift in a down position and somebody came out to access their transportation, how would they get the lift back up to them? If they don't have the strength to open that gate, there's a power gate option. So again, we've got some options to try and make things not only more functional, but at the end of the day, safety. And I think that's what you're needing to write in your letters of support. And, again, depending on who the funding source might be, whether it's a family or an external funding source, why do you need this extra accessory? It's not just, for fun. It's there for a particular reason. So documenting that is really important. Okay. So leaving in the outdoors, let's go inside. So how do we move between building levels? And again, is it a home situation? Is it a school situation? Is it a, sports facility, an attraction, those sorts of things. So we need to think about, what's the space? Where are the stairs, and where is there access to put some type of device, whether it be a stair glide, whether it be a lift, whether it be an elevator. We need to think about how many levels need to be accessed, and, thinking about some of the homes out there, split level homes, for example, where there's multiple inclines can be a challenge. And is it realistic to think that, somebody can access all of those? Do they need to live in all of those spaces? And again, from a judgment point of view, who are we to question how somebody lives in their own home? So, we can provide information and provide costing, but we need to be aware that, we're asking somebody to modify their home. We need to do that with empathy and with dignity. What's the client's ability to transfer both now and in the future? Clients, we all have, we talk about progressive conditions, but we're all progressive. We all change as we age and things like that. So we need to think about if we're putting piece of equipment in, we want it to last for a long period of time. Okay. And obviously cost is an issue. So stair glides tend to be something that we jump to very quickly because they're easy to install. They're a less costly product. They fit in many different types of environments, but we need to think about what is the transfer situation. How is the client going to get onto that? Is somebody able to stand? And if they are, can they stand and pivot? Where is, if somebody's getting out of a wheelchair and transferring onto that stair glide, what is the space like? Where are they going to put their chair and do that pivot movement? Okay. Does the foot platform go up? Okay, and get out of the way separate from the seat, because on some of the lifts, when you lift the foot platform up, the seat goes up because it's designed to get out of the way. What's the weight capacity? Is that a challenge? What's the seat size for some of our bigger clients? They're very small seats. And for someone who's very tall, again, thinking about a narrow staircase, not only is there not great seat depth to support that client as they're moving up the stairs, but also is there enough width in the seat to allow the client's knees to sit comfortably and not bang into the railing. And then when we're going between levels, if I'm using a wheelchair on the main level and I'm going upstairs, what am I going to do when I get to the top of the stairs? Can I, maybe because I'm just going to a bedroom, can I use a walker? Maybe I have a transport chair or a commode that I can use, but I need to think about what's my mobility to get when I get to where I'm going. Okay. And again, I threw in a comment about the power source and the charging. Where is the unit getting charged? Does it have to be at one end, or can it be charged at both ends? Is there a power source, or is it a battery access? And if I have a turn staircase or a split staircase, am I going up one track, then I have a landing, I either have to get off that and onto a second stair glide to go up the second part of the stairs, or am I doing a curved situation where the lift will go all the way around and then continue on? And again, that's dependent on cost and the functionality of the space. And then think about who are the other people in the house that have to maneuver around the stair glide when it's in there. So again, we need to think about all of those things when we're looking at those spaces and making sure that it is an appropriate option. I was talking with Michelle yesterday, and we were just talking about clients that have some challenges with balance. What can we do to make them safe? Because remember, that's a moving object. So can we put chest belts on there? Can we use some of the, the chest supports that you might use in a wheelchair? Can you attach that to a stair glide? They all come with a hip belt, but again, is that enough to support someone? Michelle mentioned even attaching a car seat onto it if you've got a situation with a young child, again, to make sure that they're safe while that stair glide is in motion. So we've got to add that motion piece. Moving on from a stair glide, and this you see more in commercial applications than you do in homes. For one thing, because of the size of it, and second, because of the cost. But there are indoor platform lifts that do go up and down stairs. I've used them mostly in sort of group home type settings that aren't really commercial buildings. There's only one person maybe who's available, but where it's not appropriate for the client to transfer out of their mobility device because they need it when they land at the bottom of the top of the stairs. They're not in a position to be able to necessarily have a caregiver with them all of the time. So again, we need to, if we're considering a platform lift, think about the space that it takes up, because obviously that deck takes up a fair bit of width because it has to be appropriate for the width of the chair. And it takes up space at the bottom and the top of the landing of the stairs, because that ramp has to come down, has to be appropriate that the client can actually push up that little incline. And then there has to be that safety so that the client doesn't roll back off the lift when it's in motion. So we also need to think about the headspace. I've used one of these in a split level home, and one of the challenges was the bulkhead of the stair above it, because it was a very tall person, and making sure that there was clearance. So again, is that an option? It can be a good option, but being aware of some of the challenges. The other thing is, how does it fold up for other people to access the space and not become a tripping hazard? Again, it's a heavy object. Who is going to be the one to fold that up against the wall once the client's not using the product? So just a few things to think about. So we've talked about getting into a facility. We've talked about moving between levels. I think one thing that we need to think about is how do you get out? And there's been a lot of discussion now about evacuation preparedness. And for somebody who goes into a building, they need a quick way to get out should something happen. And the reality is it could be a fire situation. It could be a lockdown situation in a school, for example. Sadly, those types of things are happening. And we need to have a plan for how people get out. Okay, so whoever goes in must be able to come out, and must be able to come out safely and with some dignity. Now, thinking about evacuation, you're adding a level of stress and panic. So we want to make sure that there is a plan. Okay, and I did a presentation a couple of years ago at the CD Mobility Conference, and we talked about, being, especially school children, how and group home situations, how do we get clients who are physically involved and using wheelchairs, how do we get them safely out of a situation? There are a number of evac chairs available. I'm most familiar with the evac chair, which is the one I'm showing you. I don't work for the company. It's just the one that I've worked with because it seemed to be the easiest one to A, get access to, and B, for caregivers to use. But we need to think about, we need minimum effort for single person operation, and that's what it's designed for. So it's designed that a small person can get a large person with no physical ability out of a building very quickly down the stairs, because we all know that in a fire situation, elevators will drop to the ground floor, which if you have a client in a wheelchair on the third floor is not very helpful. And how do we get them out? We need to think of the size of that person, and is there something appropriate for who's going to be in the building? And it could be multiple different clients. Even in a school situation, we have some very large clients. Some of the teenagers are great big children. So we need to think about, what is the evacuation plan? What are we going to do? How is that client going to be transferred on to the evacuation chair? How are they safely strapped into it? Because they don't have their seating. Okay, we're talking about something that's happening in a very hurried situation. We want to make sure that everybody knows the plan and can carry it out with the least amount of panic and stress and time, because our clients react to that stress. And if you think of someone with a lot of tone, you can see this young lady here, her tone kicking in, her right leg going up into extension. Again, as we're trying to get her in there, we don't have time for a lift. It's a quick, we need to get on to this situation. So can we use a lift? Is there a lift in the right place to get her into that? We don't know where she is. And do we have people available? We get her down the stairs. Now her wheelchair's upstairs, and you can see her wheelchair in the background there. Once we've got her down the stairs, where are we taking her? So where is the meeting point? And is there something available to transfer her to? Because maybe that chair needs to be used for another client. So all of this, we call it a preparedness plan. And we need to work not only just to provide the chair itself, but we need to make sure that there's a plan in place that everybody has had training on, and it's ongoing training as caregivers change. So I think it's a really good thing to be aware of. If you have an opportunity, HME can get you a chair to try and to test. It's very easy to use, but when you add a stressful situation, it's always that much more difficult, and you forget these things. So making sure that training opportunity happens on a regular basis. The best practice is that there's one evac chair per exit. Now, is that reality? Not yet. Are we getting there? I think so. And I think it's up to us to make sure that people are aware of that. So thinking about ease of access. So is it close to the stairwell? Is it close to the room where the children are at school? Again, how quickly can we get somebody in it? Because we don't want to rush somebody with their chair all the way to the stair access and do 2 lifts because maybe they're involved, they're taking a break. So we need to think about where that is. We need to think about the evacuation guidelines of the type of facility it is. And like I said, get that planning and that preparedness procedure down pat, and that training. Okay. So again, this is, think about this in the different types of buildings that you go into, hospitals, long-term care facilities. And when you're in these buildings, take a look around and see if they have a chair around somewhere, because it's becoming more and more of a challenge and an issue that we need to make sure we can get people out in a hurry. Okay. And at the end of the day, keep them safe. And I think this is something we haven't really spent a lot of time talking about. So it's something to really be aware of. And again, malls, can they get out of a mall? What are the situations that you might be in? So as we move, then we're in the building. We've been able to enter. We've been able to change levels. We've been able to get out in a hurry. What do we have to do when we're in buildings? We often have to go to the bathroom. Okay. And if we think about who are the people using public washrooms, for example, these are shared spaces, but we want to make sure that not only are they accessible, but are they accessible and provide dignity. We've been working with a number of different types of facilities and looking at the washrooms, whether it be airports as people are starting to travel again, whether it be rest stops on the highway, because again, people are driving. And sometimes, when you're in a chair, it's easier to drive than it is to try and deal with a plane and risk issues with equipment being damaged. We want to make sure that those public washrooms are accessible and useful. Let's take a bit of a reality check. What does an accessible washroom look like? This could be really in any type of space. It could be in a restaurant. It could be in a rest stop. It could be in a building. So, this is sort of a generic accessible washroom. Well, first of all, take a look at this picture. It's a mess. Who's cleaning it? Are there, slipping hazards? There's stuff all over the floor. Where are the grab bars? Who were those designed for, and are they going to be helpful? Well, they're put where it's convenient to put them on the wall. But if I'm using a power chair, or I have a fairly large manual chair, how am I going to position my chair to access those bars? And is that really going to help me? Okay. So thinking about that space, again, is there room to maneuver the chair? And like I say, who are those grab bars designed for? Because they're really not where I need to reach in order to be able to transfer. So does that mean that I have to have a caregiver with me all the time in order to use the washroom? And if I do, I need space for that caregiver to be with me. And the picture of the van and a changing area, I did have a situation, and this isn't their vehicle, but this family traveled with kind of a changing area available in their vehicle so that they could change their son anytime, anywhere. But is it reasonable? Is it comfortable? Is it dignified to have to stop what you're doing, go out? And in the case that I'm talking about, we were actually setting up his new wheelchair. He needed to take a break. His brother was with him. And he said, no, we're just going to go outside because we have everything set up in the van. So it's easy. We know how to do it, and I can do it quickly. Because he said we go places other than, a vendor situation, which we know will have an accessible washroom, but we want to have that facility available to us all the time. And that was their choice. But the reality is, if you're taking a group, for example, from a long-term care facility or from a group home into a library, into a mall, into a movie theater, can you expect that facility will have what you need in order to be changed? Okay. So this is the goal. This is a perfect situation where we have a change table that's height adjustable. We have grab bars that can fold down from the wall so that I could actually reach them. And I can put one down versus another one. I have a lift available. This is the goal, and we would love to think that every bathroom is like that. That's something we need to work toward and try and work with building managers to understand the benefit of having these spaces available. When we're thinking about public building spaces, okay, again, we need to think not just the space for the equipment, but in the facility, but the space for the user's equipment. And of course, different users use different types of equipment. We need to make sure that there's space around, and this is a change table, but space around the change table for a caregiver. Okay. We need to think about the height of that change table. If it's somebody who is independent, and maybe we're in a situation in a sports facility where I'm thinking of a client playing sledge hockey, for example. And if that change table was height adjustable, it means I can go in by myself. And if you think of a sledge, you're very low to the ground. If it's adjustable and it can go low enough, I could do that transfer myself onto the table, take off my equipment that I've been using to do the activity I've been doing, and put my clothes on and get back out there in the world. Think about an aquatic center or somebody that's doing hydrotherapy, these types of things. So again, change tables become very useful things. Schools, for example, again, thinking about our clients who are going to a facility for long periods of time, there is always the opportunity for an accident to happen. Again, if they can't get to the bathroom quickly or can't communicate that they need to get to the bathroom quickly, we need to give them the opportunity to have a change of clothes, be changed in a private environment and not wide open. Think about going to a bathroom and you see baby change stations. So that's fine. You've got a couple of stalls, you've got a mom changing a baby, the door opens, everybody can see in. We all expect babies to be changed. But if I'm a 13-year-old girl, is it appropriate that I'm sitting on a baby change table that's wide open to the public? That needs to be contained in a separate stall with a separate door. Or, a complete accessible bathroom where nobody's coming and going. So we need to make that appropriate. There are different types of change tables, and I'm highlighting the ones from Candan because there are lots of options. And again, this is what's accessible and what I've used and I'm familiar with. But again, speak to the HME people. They do have change tables in their offices, I believe. That you can go and see and think about the functionality of them in schools, in assisted living facilities, in group homes, and think about who's potentially using these. So we've got a mobile option, okay, which means it can be moved around. It can be moved to a different space. If you have, a large client with a lot of physical disabilities, 1 year at school, and then next year I've got clients that have more behavioral challenges. Maybe I need to put it in a different space. Maybe I don't need a fully accessible bathroom, but I just need somewhere that I can change the client. And we can adjust the height to meet the needs of that client. We have options, you can see the belts there, to make sure that they're safe. If you have to turn the client, if, again, there's somebody with a lot of movement, whether it's controlled or uncontrolled, we want to make sure that it's a safe environment, okay? Or we can do a wall-mounted change table. So think about the space. Again, with the wall-mounted, I can fold that up against the wall, clear a space for somebody else who's coming in to use that bathroom and make that available. Okay. I also, if it's a powered system, may want to lock it. And that little box up at the top on the right-hand picture there, is to lock the controller so that you don't get a bunch of kids in there playing with it and damaging the equipment. Okay. So it's being available for the clients who need it. And again, there are different types of change tables depending on the environment. So do we need a wet environment? So maybe it's a group home setting, okay, and I'm changing someone who's going to be showered, okay, or I might have it in a situation where I'm actually using a handheld shower. or it's a dry environment where it's only for changing. So I'm not necessarily having to worry about the equipment getting wet and that sort of thing. So again, we need to think about where is it going, what else is in the room, who is going to be using it, and how functional it is based on those questions. So again, here's an example of a wall-mounted change table in an accessible bathroom. So if I'm coming in there and I have a large power chair, if that change table is open, it's in my way. So that can be pushed up against the wall flat. So now I have room if I don't need it. But yet if I come in and I have a client with me and I'm the caregiver, I can access that change table. I can get it to a height that's reasonable to do the transfer. It's a comfortable environment. I'm not rushed. Clearly, this is a very private environment, and that's kind of what we're really looking for when we're considering that. So again, these are the types of things that you need to include when you're talking about where are these products being sold and where are they appropriate, and just being aware of some of these considerations. And here are some of the options. Again, when you don't know who the client is, or maybe you do know who the client is, do I need belts to make sure that somebody's safe? Okay. Do I need the rails, for somebody who's lying there and maybe I need to turn my back as the caregiver? I want to make sure that someone's safe and isn't going to roll off the change table. If it's in a group home setting, maybe I have clients who are quite agitated, or in a long-term care facility, I may have clients who are very agitated and I want to contain them and make them safe. I want padding on that. If I'm changing someone and they're going to be naked, I want to make sure that their skin is protected. Okay. Again, we always spend a lot of time on the wheelchair considering, what cushions we're using and whatever else. We also need to consider where are they being changed throughout the day, and make sure that their skin is protected there. Where is their power? Where's the power source, and who's going to do the installation and set that up? Or is it a battery operated situation? And if that's the case, then who's responsible for charging that? So these are some questions. My goal was to try and get you to think about what are the questions to ask when you start to think about some of these spaces. This is actually an installation that was done by HME in Maple Ridge at the Leisure Center. And again, it's a great example of a very flexible, accessible space. You can see there's a ceiling lift, there's a height adjustable change table there. Again, because we have clients that are doing multiple activities and the clients are there for a period of time and may need to be changed. Okay. Clients who need to change their clothing, whether it's a swimming activity or a sports activity where they're sweating and they're going out into a cold environment, or they just have an accident and they need to change their clothes because something was soiled. So again, HME can really help you in terms of their own experience having developed these types of things. And also if it's something that a family is considering or a group home is considering, or even a building is considering, there are some places that people can go to see this type of equipment, because it's not like a wheelchair and someone can bring it out for you to try. Okay. So again, we want to think about, flexibility, think about a school situation with multiple different kids and what's going to give you the best bang for your buck. So where are we thinking about where changes can happen? So schools, think about universities and colleges for our clients that are going on to post-secondary education, thinking about the opportunities within your own communities and what's available. And as I said to when I was discussing this with the HME reps, think about the places that you're going and take a look. What's available to those clients who are going into these spaces. Okay. Think about libraries. Libraries are really repurposing themselves and becoming centers for day programs. They're, again, you're going into a library for computer access, maybe you're going in for, some type of educational programming. Again, not everybody has a computer access. Maybe it's an outing for a long long-term care facility to take people out to now that we're getting out and about again. But again, we need to think about, those clients, if they're out for more than 2 or 3 hours, they're going to be in a situation where they have to use a bathroom. Okay. Sports facilities, like I talked about, think about those places where clients are going. And I'm even thinking about, families that have one child who maybe uses a mobility device, but they're going to watch their brother at the hockey arena. Okay. So is there an opportunity for them to be able to come and be part of the family and, be able to use the washroom in that facility and maybe not have to go, get the coat back on and go out to the car to do the changing. Okay. Like I said, airports, long-term care facilities, and again, thinking about the bathing facilities within the long-term care facilities, especially some of the older ones that don't have great spaces, or maybe are repurposing spaces for bathing types of situations. Okay, not just toileting, because the bathroom is too small to be transferring someone. Think about malls. Think about service and rest stations. Again, think about the places where you go and you take your families, and what's available for families that have children with mobility devices, or families that have older parents that may be using accessible devices. And again, that going back to that Access Now app is really an opportunity to sort of plan out your trip and your outing and make sure that it's a good experience, because we don't want people to be stressed and not want to go out again. Now, something that has just become available is this idea of accessible sinks. And Kandan has accessed these products from Denmark. And as I talked with Morgan at Kandan about it, the Danish are very good in terms of developing products to make sure that their aging population ages with dignity and has products available to make their lives easier and to be able to maintain their ability to stay at home. So these are something that can be considered for not only home use, but for public space use, schools. And these sinks are designed to not only be accessible, so you can see it's very open, somebody can pull up to that in their chair, or even thinking somebody using a walker might sit on the seat on their walker, put the brakes on, and then reach over to the sink. In a public space, it would be so great if you could access that sink very quickly. Think about a hospital situation, think about a long-term care home, think about, a group home setting where several people share a bathroom and they have multiple different needs. I think from a school setting, again, it gives that flexibility when you don't know who's coming into the school next year. Okay, so these can be accessible adjustable, either powered or non-powered. And the non-powered doesn't mean you're going to adjust it every time, but for somebody in a facility who's there for a short term, that could be managed when somebody new comes in and uses that accessible room. Okay. It can be used with wheelchairs, with commodes. Okay. And something that it's a bit hard to see in the picture, but there are handles for transfers for stability. So again, somebody using a walker who might have to then stand up and turn around to be able to walk away. Okay. Or maybe stands up as they're changing and there's not a spot appropriate in the bathroom for a grab bar that would make sense. Somebody can stand up for a caregiver to be able to pull somebody's pants down. So it adds some really interesting functional opportunities. So we need to think, there are different size and shapes of the sinks. Again, this is something that's very nice looking. It makes the bathroom look very nice. So again, if you're in your home, and we have people that, have some very nice homes that are living with parents or living with children and don't want something ugly in their beautiful bathroom. Okay. So again, it's something that's got kind of a modern design to it and looks good, but yet still has that functionality for a client. It might be a young client who's going to get bigger and grow and change in a home situation, or like I say, in a situation where it's a multi-use space that multiple different people are going to use it. Okay. So I wanted to bring that to your attention because it's something that not everybody is aware of. Then moving on to moving our patients. Maybe before I do that, are there any questions, Jeff? I feel like I'm moving really quickly through this.
Yeah, we did have a couple of questions from sort of a previous part of the presentation, but maybe just off the top of your head, do you know where we can, this is from Alex, do you know where we can find building code that qualifies as accessible so that we know and have a baseline to start from? I think what he's asking is there a reference that you know of where it'll say if a particular building is accessible or not?
So if you're thinking of a specific building and finding the building code, I'm probably not the person to ask, but go online. There certainly are building codes available. They're a bit challenging to try and find. Jeff, I don't know if you've looked for anything.
I just briefly had a look on the BC government website, and it doesn't specify particular buildings as being quote unquote accessible or not. It just shows what the qualifications to make a building accessible are.
Yeah. And I think that's probably all that you're going to find. I think, again, when you're looking for that information is very generic, and our clients are also different. There are some resources that I can try and find for you, but again, even some of the builders who are building accessible equipment may have something, but I think you'll get the actual specs. But sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean something. I get asked the question about turning radius a lot.
Yeah.
What's the turning radius of a specific wheelchair? I can tell you how to measure it. You measure from the drive wheel to the furthest point out, but that doesn't really tell you the functionality of turning that space. So what may look, it's got enough, and people will say, oh, it's got a 41-inch turning radius. Well, what does that mean? Where do I need to do that turn? So maybe in a kitchen situation, there's space to turn around, but then when I turn around, I can't actually access the oven, or I can't reach the fridge door without backing up. So I kind of take that information with a grain of salt. I think really the best thing to do is to try and get into the facility and see the space. And try and see if it's something that is appropriate. And, call on the HME team that have, been in a lot of different spaces, have worked with installers to look at what's appropriate. It's a really difficult thing to publish what makes it accessible versus not, because again, it's so different for everybody.
Alex is asking if, he's asking about elevators and some other things. Michelle sounds like has a few links that will help you, Alex, that she can send you afterwards. Let's carry on with the presentation, and then Alex will get you some information after the presentation is over.
I mean, it is a good question.
Yeah.
So safe patient lifting and handling, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on lifts, but I did want to bring it up because, again, it's something that you're using in a variety of different settings, and certainly from a school perspective, we need to think about the safety of the caregivers, and certainly WorkSafe BC has very strict safe working loads that caregivers have to work within, especially publicly funded caregiving situations, so long-term care, schools with educational assistance and that type of thing. And we need to think about the best practices around these. So as I'm sure you're all aware, there's really three types of lifts. You have a floor lift, there is a standing lift, and a full body lift pictured here. And we have ceiling lifts that are actually mounted into the structure of the building. There are some what we call gantries or freestanding lift systems if you don't have the ability to mount permanently a lift into a ceiling because of building restrictions. There could be situations where you don't want to open the ceiling and find asbestos. And this is something that I didn't know till I learned the hard way. We spec'd out a ceiling lift for somebody who lived on the first floor of a building, apartment building, first floors tend to have an awful lot of things in the ceiling different from the upper levels. So if you do run into a situation where you're looking at installing a ceiling lift on a main floor of a building, start to ask more questions, because the installers can sometimes find big surprises, okay? And in some of the newer homes too, some of the engineered wood that's being used in some of the homes may not be appropriate. So again, like I said, with everything, do a little pre-planning before you make a decision about which type of product you're going to go for, okay? But the goal of any lift, our goal is really to develop a culture of safety. BC, like I said, has led the charge in terms of implementing guidelines and best practices around use of ceiling lifts versus floor lifts. When I talk about floor lifts have their benefit in that you can use, you can push them anywhere. So the picture at the bottom there is someone who's fallen. And the joke is always nobody falls under the track. They fall somewhere else. So it's always not a bad idea. And from a best practice perspective, to have a floor lift available, even in facilities where there are multiple ceiling lifts. Okay, it never hurts. I had a situation with a client, even in a home situation, and they had a ceiling lift upstairs in the bedroom and in the bathroom, but they kept a floor lift. If there was an issue with the charge, the lift lost its charge and the power went out, or if the elevator failed and she couldn't go upstairs, or just an accident happened on the main floor of the house versus upstairs. So it never, again, when we're thinking about safety, we're thinking about schools, group homes, or whatever else, it's never a bad thing to have that backup plan, okay? Again, safety and dignity. It's certainly, we get lots of clients that are afraid to be hanging from a bar like that. It's sometimes daunting. You've got a bar that hangs down from the ceiling, and do you trust that ceiling? If you're apprehensive, maybe you're, have an element of cognitive challenge, it may feel uncomfortable. So training for caregivers, not only in physically how to use the lift, but how to approach a client who's going to use the lift. Okay, how do you talk to the client, tell them what they're going to do, and make sure that our caregivers know who's playing what role. The best practice for lifting is to always have two caregivers. And I always say one caregiver is responsible for managing the client and one's responsible for managing the equipment. Okay, that's kind of how I tend to break it out in new situations. But each facility needs to implement their own safe lifting policies and have those procedures. And then it needs to be documented how each particular client, what sling they use, how does that get set up, what position does the bed need to be in, what position does the chair need to be in when you're actually doing that lift. Okay, so that education needs to be ongoing because staff turns over. Every year there are new EAs, and even throughout the year, making sure that if, let's say my client goes to school and her educational assistant is sick that day, is there someone that can step in and be able to do that lift appropriately? Because if the client's staff person isn't there, does that mean they have to stay home from school? That's not appropriate, and that's not a reasonable expectation. Those kids have a right to access school just like every other kid. So there needs to be that backup planning. And then what happens in an emergency is, does someone know how to get a floor lift, operate that floor lift, and pick somebody up off the floor, okay? Without having to necessarily call the fire department, because that takes time. And then the last thing is, what is the plan for equipment maintenance? And whether it's in a home environment, whether it's in a public space environment, that equipment, the expectation is that it's there and ready to use at all times. So there needs to be a plan in place to make sure that it's checked, that we recommend that, the staff do safety checks just quickly to eyeball it to make sure that the battery is in properly before you have the client all hooked up on the lift and ready to go. Let's make sure the lift is working so that we don't have a situation where you've got an angry client who's upset. Why am I hanging here? I can't be lifted. And everybody's running around like chickens with their heads cut off. So there's, again, when you're doing that education, making sure that you think about those things. And I did a series of lift training sessions as new transitional care units popped up during the pandemic because we had to get people out of hospitals. And it was interesting. I always in a group would get two people to one would play the patient role, one would play the caregiver role, or two would play the caregiver roles. And just making sure that little things like the cords are tucked out of the way. Everybody got the lift stuck on a cord under the bed. Making sure that we don't do that. With ceiling lifts, again, making sure that they're charged, who's responsible for the charge, when, is it built in so that all you have to do when you're finished the lift is push that lift into its charging spot. So it's always charged and ready to go. Okay. So making sure that you have that plan. In terms of ceiling lifts, certainly there are lift of choice because they're easier to use. They're tucked out of the way. And if our goal is to keep caregivers safe, pushing a unit and twisting and turning it really defeats the purpose of actually using the lift because we're still putting them at risk for back injuries. Okay. And again, what is the floor surface that they have to push on? So a ceiling lift is the better choice, for a permanent situation. Okay. So it's mounted on a track that's either mounted into the ceiling in a situation with a drop ceiling. The rods go up into the cement structure and drop it down below, the tiles that you see. Again, we need to think about weight capacity. So how much do we need? And do you need 1,000-pound weight capacity? Do you need 500 pounds? Again, when you're looking at who's going to be using it and the population that's going to be using the lift, again, we don't always know. So erring on the side of caution is always good. But when we get into some of the bariatric lifts, we need to think about those spreader bars. They may be too big for the general population. They may be too wide, and then the sling won't fit the client properly. So again, we need to look at the situation and make a judgment based on that the particular needs of that facility. Okay. Is it a situation where it's reasonable to push someone manually on the track? Maybe there's need for a power traversing, which means I push the button and the unit will slide back and forth along the track. If you're in a situation, again, where you have a client who might be independent, they may want that option, in a home situation. If you have clients who are very difficult and you don't want to get too close to them because they have uncontrolled movements and something like that, again, maybe that is an option. And although we don't recommend only one caregiver, the reality is sometimes in home situations or in an emergency situation, we only have one caregiver. At least that means the caregiver's hands are free. They're just pushing a button in order to get that lift to move. So again, look at what the options are and what the benefit is. Is it something that's nice to have? Is it something that's essential to have? And if it's essential to have, document why it's essential for that particular client that you're working with. We need to think about, again, client and caregiver safety. And we need to think about the installation location. So where are we going to attach that lift to the ceiling? And, is it viable? Is the ceiling, is it viable? Is it an old house and you're concerned about the condition of the house? And, if we go in and look at the joists, are they in good enough condition to mount a ceiling lift? So again, take a walk through the environment, look for clues about how the house has been taken care of. Is it a rental situation? And maybe we need, something that's wall mounted or on a freestanding system, but yet is still a ceiling lift. So there are options for these things. So like I said, pre-planning, we really recommend, and I think, we need to, as OTs and physios, toot our own horns and say, you really need to consult with us because we can look at the particular situation and the needs of the clients and the caregivers, as opposed to, a building saying we're going to go and we're going to put lifts in, and they go in and do it without consulting anybody, and we end up with a challenging situation. We have to remove furniture, move it around, change the location, and maybe we compromise the safety of the caregivers because there isn't appropriate space, or the client's not landing in the right spot in the bed, for example. And then we risk issues of having to move the client in the bed. So I'm going to show you something in a minute, but things to think about. So what's the purpose and the necessity? Okay, for the clients, why are we using the lift, and what, are we going from bed to wheelchair? Are we going bed to a fixed chair? Are we going bed to a commode? And is there space for those pieces of equipment to come into the room? Is it reasonable to think that maybe we want to track the full distance? So maybe if the bathroom is part of the room, maybe I can just do a track that takes me from the bed over the toilet, and I don't have to use another piece of equipment. So it's more costly to install a longer track, but yet maybe I don't then need a commode. So again, we need to weigh all of the pros and cons of this. How long is the piece of equipment going to be used? If it's a temporary situation, maybe a floor lift is appropriate because we don't know how long the person's going to be living at home. Maybe they're waiting to get into a long-term care facility. Maybe they're waiting for a group home. In a school year, is the client going to stay at that particular school? Although I don't think you go wrong saying to a school board that having a ceiling lift can be used by multiple different clients. And thinking about the destination, what position does the client need to be in to be best lowered into that seat, whether it's a commode, whether it's a chair? Do we have the ability to change the position of the chair or change the position of the bed? Because just because a lift can lift you really high doesn't mean you need to lift that person very far. Okay, lifting onto the bed, if you've got an adjustable height bed, it's way easier on the client and the caregivers to move the bed up and down and have it ready so that the client only has to travel a short distance. Okay, and they don't have to, be lifted 6 or 8 inches off the seat of the chair. And be moved around and have issues with friction and all of those kinds of things. We need to think about how often the lift is being used and where the lift is being used and where the staff is and the frequency. So think about, clients at school with EAs. Do they have their own EA, or is that EA, working with several different clients? So do we plan times when somebody's going to be changed? But can we do that? Thinking about a client going to school, every day is not exactly the same. You can't say you're going to be toileted at 11 o'clock every morning. I may have had more to drink. Maybe I ate different food the night before. There are lots of things that implement that. So we need to be respectful of, staff time and availability, but also the dignity and the function of the clients and who's available to use it. And if something happens, is there a backup staff available? Okay. And do we have the appropriate equipment for the task that we need to do? So we need to think about, like I said, having a backup plan with a floor lift for somebody who falls on the floor. When we're talking about ceiling lifts, and this is true of both facilities and home situations, we need to go in and look at where is the track going to be installed for functionality of use. So if it's over a bed, for example, this client is going to be moved to the side and lowered down into a wheelchair or a commode likely. And what's available? Is there furniture in the way? Look where this lift is installed. I mean, typically, and I hate recipes and I hate saying, this is the standard, but usually we're looking at the track being mounted about 2.5, 3 feet down the bed so that there's room for the person to land in the proper spot on that bed, so we don't have to slide the person up and down. Okay. We also want to make sure that there's room for the chair to fit in, depending on what sort of furniture. Are there other beds in the room and other clients in the room? Is there furniture? And I bring this up because a number of years ago, a new facility was built here as a complex continuing care facility. So there were some residents, and there was some rehab floors. They decided that when they built the new building, they were going to repurpose the lifts that had been in the old facility, and they were just going to move them over. Well, what they didn't think about in the new facility was, and you can see even in this picture, there's a unit on the wall by the bed, and that houses oxygen, it houses electricity, hookups for different machinery. So, that takes up quite a bit of space in that wall. So the bed isn't actually up against the wall. In the old facility, the track was short and had a curve. Okay. When they put it in, it wasn't in the right place because of that space. And in order to actually get someone in the chair, they had to move all of the furniture out from beside the bed, put the chair in right up against the wall, move the client over, drop them down, but there wasn't room for a caregiver to go in behind a chair, and there wasn't room to tilt the chair before it hit the wall. So really, it was an exercise in trying to save money, and all they did was put everybody at risk. So, what ended up happening is a year later, we went in, we put new lifts in that had what we call an XY system. And what we mean by an XY system is the tracking is mounted in the ceiling, but yet there's a second track that slides between. So it's like an H. So think of that horizontal bar there, slides forward and back. So basically what you're doing is providing track for the entire room, which means you have flexibility to move things around. Okay. In a school setting, okay, maybe I have clients and maybe I have a mobile change table that I can't fold up against the wall. So I can put it where I need it, but then I can also move my lift where I needed it. Okay. In the assessment rooms, even at the vendors, a lot of times you see this XY system because it means multiple clients can be lifted from wherever they need to be lifted using however many staff people they need in a position that's safe for everybody. Okay, so it basically gives you a ceiling track now that covers the entire room so that A, maybe I don't need a floor lift, so you can maybe save cost there. But B, I have the flexibility now to safely transfer everybody in the room and not cause any additional risk to the caregivers because they're trying to force the furniture around and they can't get right in behind the chair and position the client properly, or they can't take advantage of tilt chairs. So really, this is something to really consider and think about when you're looking at accessible spaces and trying to use a ceiling lift situation. And then lastly, as we talk about lifts, don't forget the sling. The sling, and I think we're seeing a shift, and the focus on infection controls has helped us to work toward the best practice that the sling is really part of the client and needs to meet the individual needs of that client. So when we're choosing slings, we need to think about skin integrity. Okay, and what fabrics are we choosing? Because a lot of times we're lifting someone, especially in a bathing situation and a toileting situation, where we're removing clothing, and that fabric of the sling is right against the client's skin. There's no protection. So again, different manufacturers of lifts have different sling options, different shapes, different sizing. And then there are companies like Silvalee that only do slings. And so you have lots of choices of different slings that you can use based on the needs of the client. Okay? We need to think about the comfort and the support and the position and control of the body. We need to think about pain and joint restrictions. Or with clients that have a lot of high tone, for example, we want them in a position so we're not setting that off and causing harm to the client during that lifting process. We need to think about how easy it is to apply the sling. We don't want clients sitting on slings all day unless it's really necessary. And if we are having clients sitting on slings, we need to choose an appropriate material that's again not going to have any seams that can cause skin issues, that's not going to fold and create an area of high pressure, and we want the sling to fit and provide even weight distribution and get the clients in a position that is going to lend itself to where they're going. So if I'm transferring into bed, for example, I can have the client a bit more reclined because I want them to land, and I don't want them to fall all the way back. I'm going to lift the head of the bed and just let them gently fall down into the bed. In the case of a wheelchair, I want somebody to be more upright because I don't want to fight to pull somebody back, especially a big client or a client with a lot of tone. I want to be able to guide them back into the chair. Okay. And if they have a lot of seating components, I want it to be simple, that we're not going to get the sling all caught up on those seating components. Okay. So we need to think about that. And we want to make it a good experience for both the clients and the caregivers so that they want to use the lift, that it's a simple situation and it's easy. So again, take a look at what sling options are available out there, because there are quite a number of different things available. And we've always said, you try seating, you also need to consider trying slings and making sure what you're choosing is appropriate, because one sling doesn't fit all. And again, this is really today about introducing you to what's available. And then through 2023, HME is going to continue to do a series of more focused sessions. So really, this was about today asking questions, knowing the concepts of what equipment is out there and where you can apply it. So the last product category that I want to bring up is the concept of adjustable height desks. And this is something, it comes up as we talk about schools, but can actually have greater access beyond schools now that people are working from home more often. People are going out into different facilities to access programs, such as I talked about libraries earlier, and they're doing activities in different places now. So why would we need a height adjustable desk? Well, obviously we need access, okay? Different chairs, we spend a lot of time considering the height of a wheelchair. How high is it going to be? What's the height for transferring? What's the height for accessing the different activities that they do? Activities of daily living and sinks and home activities versus school activities versus vocational activities. So again, we've spent a lot of time making decisions about the chair. It would be really nice if the desk at school can be adjusted to meet that need. And again, thinking about the school, is the client in one particular classroom all day, or are they in multiple classrooms where they are sharing desks between people? Okay. We need to think about what equipment they're using. So maybe during the day, if I have a stander, I'm actually going to be using the stander while we're in a particular class or doing a particular activity. So I need that desk to be at a different height, and I need it to be in a different place around me. Okay. We need to consider, what space is available for the client if they're using adapted seating, whether it be an adapted classroom chair or a wheelchair. And maybe I need lateral stability for function. So I need to come into that desk and have some support around me so that I can position my upper extremities. And then if you look at the picture at the bottom, maybe I need an angle. And maybe that's for functional activities. Maybe that's for me to be able to use my upper extremities because I have a progressive neuromuscular condition and I can't work up against gravity, but I can slide things. Or maybe I have visual limitations that mean the paper or the book or the computer needs to be at a specific angle for me to be able to see it. Okay, but our goal is really thinking about inclusion in those activities. Okay. And again, like I say, if you invest in something that's adjustable, that can be used multiple years over. And a question that I had for Morgan this morning was, if I order a desk like this, it's mobile, it's adjustable in height, the tabletop is adjustable in angle, I have different sort of cutouts so I get some lateral support for my upper extremities, but maybe I have a different client next year and they need something different. We've invested in this desk, could we change out the tabletop? Because I need something like the one at the bottom right there that's cut out for a joystick. So if I have a power chair, I can drive right up into my desk and I don't have to try and swing the joystick out of the way. Okay? I don't have to think about, I've now swung my joystick out of the way, but now I can't reach it to drive. So now I'm stuck and I need someone to get me in or out of the table. Am I damaging? Some of our clients use mini joysticks that are very, very fragile. I don't want somebody moving it in and out of the way. I want to just be able to tuck into place and go ahead. And maybe I'm using my driver control on my power chair to also access my computer. So maybe my mini joystick becomes what I use to access my computer. So I need it available to me and I need it in a very specific place. Okay. So the nice thing with these desks is the goal is that they're very flexible. They're very adjustable. And again, like I say, we're talking about this in a school setting, but maybe that's also very appropriate in a work setting. Or maybe somebody's now working from home, but space is limited and I'm using my desk for more than one activity. Maybe I'm using it to work and access my computer, but I'm also using it to eat. So again, thinking about what are the options that are available. I'm just trying to give you some ideas of some products that you can consider. And like I say, when you're dealing with something like this, it's a more durable product that's able to be used between multiple users. I'm kind of wrapping up and leaving a little bit of time for questions here. When we think about accessibility, then what is your role? Really, I think the role is a consultative role. It's a role of providing options and solutions and education. And in order to do that, you need to understand what's available. And you don't need to know every specific piece of equipment. That's the job of the vendor. And HME has a lot of different pieces of equipment that may be able to be seen at their facility. They can show you. Manufacturers now have pretty good websites that have video capability so that you can see how these pieces of equipment work and then start to know the specific features of each particular piece of equipment. But I think it's really good to know, what's available, and be able to ask the question about the details. You're recommending to somebody something that makes a client's life more independent, more functional, and makes a caregiver's life easier with greater, with fewer risks. Okay. We need to think about the facilities and the suitability. And like I said, is it realistic for a space to be used for multiple people? Or do we need to think about maybe there's a bathroom for the walking kids and there's a bathroom for the kids with power chairs? Because there's just not enough space to make it flexible enough for everybody. And if you only have one bathroom and two kids need to go to the bathroom at the same time, how do you manage that? Okay, so planning for the unknown is kind of the art of this whole thing. You want to develop a knowledgeable team, okay, and a team that works together. So as you're starting to talk about equipment, who's the vendor that you're working with? And you want to make sure that you're working with someone that does know these pieces of equipment and knows who to go to and has good installers, okay, that know how to do the installation. Okay. I've had people come to us and say, oh, well, we'll install the ceiling lift ourselves. Well, it's all well and good that a family member says, I want to save money by doing it. But no vendor should be doing that because of the liability. If it falls down because it wasn't installed properly, who's liable for that? Okay. And again, when you're involved in it, you need to be aware of all of that and be able to explain and educate the people who are purchasing the equipment. You know, again, sometimes you'll have a builder who says, well, we'll install the ceiling lift. Well, they're not trained. You know, you want to get the people who are selling the lift should be the ones installing the lift. The people who are in, you know, whether it's a porch lift, a ceiling lift, again, you need those knowledgeable people to do that. Because again, at the end of the day, it's all about safety for users and caregivers, okay? And we want to make sure that as we're trying to do our justification letters, that we have resources available, you know, that we're going to send you, that you have websites available, that you have manufacturers available. Manufacturers are now trying to give you some samples of justification levels, just to, you know, if you don't write a justification letter about a lift every day, sometimes it's hard to know what's too much information and what's not enough. So sometimes having a guideline available just gives you some keywords to be able to use to write a very succinct letter, because sometimes, you know, I've read letters asking for pieces of equipment, and in it, you know, and from an OT perspective, it's great saying, you know, the client will have better quality of life. Well, that's great. That's what we're all aiming for. But a funding source is not interested in that. They just want to look at why do they need to provide the money for this specific thing and what they're going to gain and what risks are going to be avoided. And we need to be realistic. We're asking for things that are expensive. So what's their durability like? What's their expected lifespan? How are they going to be used by the client? And we know certain clients are harder on things than other clients. Again, if a product is going to be used by multiple users in a public environment, it needs to be very durable because we don't know who's using it. So we need to think and be able to explain what is the cost versus the benefit and be able to lay that out. Okay, so hopefully this has given you an introduction to what's out there. Like I said, HME is going to go deeper into this over the next year and do some more focused sessions. But our goal today was just to try and get people talking about accessibility and get people thinking about accessibility.
I will thank Kathy for making yourself available. This was incredibly informative, and we appreciate all the support of everybody on this webinar today. So with that, Kathy, if you don't have anything to add, I guess we can conclude.
All right. Well, thank you for including me in your education plan.